the war's not over. We're just not part of it anymore. It's still going on. Al-Qaeda is devastating Iraq. And I talked to that gentleman you referred to in that article. I talked to him yesterday on the phone. I talk to him every few days.
So they are in a constant battle to try to keep Al-Qaeda, to get them out of their country.
Yeah, because Al-Qaeda needs to destabilize Iraq. They cannot have a stable democracy in the Middle East, and that's what they're fighting against.
Hi, I'm Allison Hope Weiner, and welcome to another episode of Media Mayhem. Today, we have an amazingly interesting guest, Tim Clemente, who is a former FBI agent turned television writer. But before we get into talking a little bit about Tim, I wanted to tell all of the viewers a couple of things. First of all, I wanted you guys to know that you should continue writing to me on the Facebook page, Media Mayhem with Allison Hope Weiner. Follow me on Twitter at @HopeWeiner. I'm actually beginning to write some things that might be worth reading, and also alerting you to when we have special shows like we did on Monday with Roseanne Barr. And I also want you to follow Nick, producer Nick, at Nick A. Guerra, Guerra. So we're really looking forward to hearing your comments and questions. And when we tell you that we have a show upcoming, if you have special things that you want me to ask, I'm happy to do it if you write in a little bit ahead of time, since I'm usually want to just like grab that off of the Facebook page and include it in my questions. So now let's get to Tim. I want to welcome him to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Tim was a FBI special agent who worked as a counterterrorism and tactical operations expert around the world, specializing in Europe, the Balkans, the Middle East, and Africa. He's also an expert interviewer and interrogator, and extremely adept at flipping people, which like will come in handy today if like I guess I get out of control. And he also was a policeman before entering the FBI. And now he, having been a cop, an FBI agent, and military advisor, he is working as a writer on The Unit on CBS, Lie to Me, and NCIS Los Angeles. And Tim was just telling me that he has written the Christmas episode for NCIS.
That's right, NCIS Los Angeles.
NCIS Los Angeles.
Second part of that franchise.
Yeah, are you liking it?
I love it, yeah. I actually co-wrote it with one of the executive producers, and it's the Christmas episode that'll air mid-December, I think around the 17th. And it's a great show to work on.
They have a bit of a chip on their shoulder about like not, even though they have a huge audience, that of not being recognized. I remember Don Belisario like always saying things to me about how is it that they have one of the top shows or the #1 drama on television and then nobody was writing about it. I think, I mean, it's kind of strange.
They don't get that publicity, and I think you know, the both shows in that franchise do very, very well. They're 2 of the top 5 shows on television every week.
I know.
So they've created a heck of a franchise, and maybe that's justice enough, but
it got a real pop in the ratings. I mean, this is like kind of weird. After 9/11, when there's like a surge in patriotism, their ratings seem to go up for that show. And it's kind of interesting because I remember writing about it, and it, especially the first one in the series. But yeah, it's kind of odd. I mean, I think that they have a super loyal audience, but maybe it's not flashy enough. Or what do you think it is that it hasn't captured the media's attention?
I think maybe they don't knock down a lot of barriers. You know, they're very, very stable and mainstream in the you know, the content that they put out there, and it resonates obviously with the public because they have such high viewership. But you know, in the flagship, the NCIS show, kind of was dropping in its ratings, and then it had a resurgence, and it was reborn, and now I think it's in year 10 or 11 and doing great still.
Do you find yourself having to hit a certain kind of political tone when you're writing for that, for NCIS Los Angeles? Are you careful not to go too far to the right or to the left?
I think they have studiously avoided a political tone on the show. They really don't get into, you know, social issues or anything else ordinarily. And you know, it's the murder of the week. That's the way those shows usually work. And you know, in reality, the NCIS agency has benefited from the shows. They literally have. Their budgets have gone up exponentially because members of Congress literally like those shows and want to help out the agency, the actual Naval Criminal Investigative Service, because of what they've seen on the show, which in fact doesn't reflect a lot of reality when it comes to
well, let me
the investigations they do.
Let me go a little bit into your background and ask you, so when you joined the FBI, what year was it when you joined?
I joined in '95.
Okay, so I wonder what it was like being a member, I mean, being pretty a long-standing member of the FBI or working for them after 9/11 when there was all the blame game going on. What was it like to actually be there, and what was the general opinion in the FBI about the failure of any intelligence to anticipate 9/11?
Well, the blame was well-deserved because both the FBI and CIA, we had that wall of separation that was inadvertently created, and then within the FBI there were other walls of separation. Like, for instance, the foreign counterintelligence side has a lot of technology and techniques they use for intelligence gathering that are not allowed to be used on the criminal side. And terrorism is kind of in the middle. It's in that gray area between foreign counterintelligence and criminal. So investigations in the terrorism side are hampered by the fact that we can't release the types of investigative techniques we use in the foreign counterintelligence side. Can't be released in public, can't be released in a courtroom. And when you're looking at a terrorism case as a criminal case, eventually there's going to be time in a courtroom. And that jury and that judge is going to want to hear how and why you did things. And so there were techniques that we couldn't use that were only available to that side of the house, that after 9/11 with the Patriot Act, some of those were allowed to then be used on the criminal side of the house, which, you know, there's an uproar of questions about civil liberties and everything else, but in reality, it's the only way to be safe, because terrorism is not the same as any other law enforcement investigation. A law enforcement investigation, a robbery, a murder, a kidnapping, those are all reactive. So in other words, the law enforcement agency finds out after the fact and tries to investigate to find out who did it, why, and then prosecute them. Terrorism, you have to be proactive. You can't just react to that bomb after it's gone off. You have to move left of the boom, as we say.
So you think it's okay to stop and not protect civil liberties in the balancing act of trying to keep ourselves safe? Don't you think it's possible to still preserve those civil liberties?
Oh, no, I do agree. I do agree we have to preserve those civil liberties. But it is a balancing point, because the civil liberties of the average citizen are infringed by criminal activities. It just happens. You know, it's why there's a TSA. I think the TSA has gone too far with a lot of things they do. I don't think you need to pat down a 3-year-old kid.
Right.
But, you know, how much explosives can they be carrying in a 2-inch pocket? It's ridiculous. But we've gone to the ridiculous because we've studiously avoided who is our real enemy. What are we fighting against? And in order not to be profiling legitimately, which is what I think we need to do, we're now going to the ridiculous.
Yeah, do you think, like, if you had a magic wand, I mean, would you really restructure, and certainly for everybody, every American who goes anywhere is very familiar with what has happened with the TSA. I mean, would you really stop patting down like old ladies and profile, and do you think that there's some point that the people have against profiling? I mean, where do you come down on that?
I come down on the side of, look at what Israel does. I mean, their airlines, they've been incredibly safe.
Right.
Air travel in Israel has always been safe throughout the world on Israeli airlines. And the reason for that is what they do profile. Who is the enemy? Who is the one that really wants to bring down our planes, kill our people right now around the world? It's Islamic extremists. And I have hundreds of friends who are Muslims who also hunt Islamic extremists. So I'm not talking about Islam as a faith, and I'm not talking about Muslims as a people. I'm talking about Islamic extremists, which is a very select minority within Islam. That's our enemy. Those are the people that brought down those planes on 9/11 and brought down the World Trade Centers and tried to bring down the Pentagon. So looking at an 85-year-old woman with gray hair that's coming in on a walker and eyeing her closely because she's on a walker and there could be explosives in that walker is a waste of resources. Those resources would be better served looking into the eyes of actual people on the line, because behavior broadcasts itself. If you're about to blow yourself up on a plane, I guarantee you're not calm, cool, and collected when you're walking down that line hoping you're going to be able to get to that plane to blow yourself up or bring that plane down. And every one of those hijackers, the 19 hijackers on 9/11, exhibited tendencies that we saw in the video playback.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, well, what did you see?
We saw nervousness, incredible nervousness, which you would expect to see. And it's one of the things the Israelis use as a tool. You're walking down that line. They literally have canine handlers and officers just walking down the line, making eye contact with every single person, outside the airport, inside the airport, at the ticket counter, and at the gate. At all 4 of those places, there are people being weeded out by visual cues they're giving off. Because nobody can get to that level where they would be that calm that you wouldn't notice some change in their behavior. And you know, maybe somebody's nervous because he's flying home to give his girlfriend an engagement ring,
or
and,
having to
and
fly
so
home
he
to see
gets
his family.
Yeah, and he gets detained for an extra 30 seconds to say, you know, what are you nervous about? Let's talk and see, and get the truth out of him. But other people, whether they were good or bad, would be, you know, less detained, because the average person right now gets detained. I fly literally every week cross country, and I go through the same nonsense all the time. And I have handcuffs in my carry-on bag. I always carry handcuffs. I'm a retired federal agent. I don't want to be in a situation where handcuffs could allow me to detain somebody on a flight or anywhere else.
They always ask you about that.
Not always.
What are your
About
plans?
20% of the time. Why do you have handcuffs? Because I can. There's nothing illegal about it, and if I need them, I have them. You know, and I wear a gun every time except when I'm traveling, and I hate traveling without a gun. When I was an agent, I did. But, you know, the TSA, what they're doing now is overwhelmingly slowing down travel, causing greater expense, and they're not necessarily making us safer because they're looking for things instead of looking for the people.
But, and by the way, the people that are looking for things, some of them are semi-retarded. I mean, you see people with no education. I mean, you're talking about with Israeli agents who are looking into people's faces, who are trained to spot certain things, and I can hear it in your explanation of making eye contact. And you just said a couple of little things that they're supposed to be doing. I mean, the people at the airport aren't looking at anything. I mean,
No,
they're just
well,
really
they're
just
looking for things, and
okay.
when you
I mean,
give them your,
they're not trained, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
well, they're trained, but the training isn't, I don't think, appropriate. And you give the guy your boarding pass and your driver's license. He's looking with the, you know, the purple light. Is the driver's license real? You know, checking the name and everything else, and that's all well and good. But if he would have spent that time looking at you and saying, "Why are you traveling? You know, what do you seem nervous? Is there a problem?
That would make
Is there
me
something
nervous.
you're not telling me?" You know, now you're going to elicit a response that's going to be real because, you know, looking up at the person one time to see is this the same face on the driver's license isn't stopping anybody. It's not, because we got to stop the people, and the behavior that those people are exhibiting is going to bleed through. It's going to.
Well, let me ask you also, you said that you were saying you had a lot of friends who are Muslims, which always sounds like, you know, I have a lot of friends who are Jewish.
It's not a throwaway line.
But
I worked in Iraq for over a year. One of my best friends in the world is an Iraqi police officer who's a Sunni Muslim. I was with him a month and a half ago with his wife. His wife had a baby. I was there with him for the birth of his son. I've spent many, many, many months in Africa in Muslim countries. I worked with leaders of the Somali government when they were trying to form a new government in 2004 and 2005. And this year they just formed a new government. It's 98% Muslim country. I would say, without exaggerating, probably 100 Somali friends, both in Somalia and Somali Americans here, all of whom are Muslim.
And let me ask you, when you were working with them, was there a big discussion in forming the government about how they were going to handle the piracy? I mean,
yeah, the piracy is a big thing, and beginning long before it became the problem it is now, I was helping them on counterterrorism issues and trying to help deal with it. And basically, it's an economic problem, though, in Somalia. The reason they have piracy is they haven't had a centralized government. So without a central government, there was nobody to regulate the waters off Somalia. And Somalia has the longest coastline in Africa, 1,200 miles of scenic Indian Ocean and Gulf of Aden coastline, and some of the most prolific marine life anywhere in the world. And it's because of the confluence of the warm waters from the Red Sea and the cold waters of the Indian Ocean.
So it could be a tourist location.
Well, no, but it's a beautiful tourist location. It could be, but it's phenomenal fishing waters.
Okay.
And so you have all these people coming into Somali waters because there's no Somali Coast Guard. There's nobody saying don't come, and they're illegally fishing there. And what that created was then a response from Somalis saying, you're stealing our fish and taking them off to India, China, and everywhere else. So that's where the piracy began. It was an economic problem. And so now you have, it's evolved to the point of now it's economically beneficial to be a pirate. Because right now, what other industry is there in Somalia? You can either be a fisherman or you can be a pirate. And there's the Somali people.
Was the money from the piracy going back to the pirates, or was it being used for some terrorism?
Oh, a lot of it was being used for terrorism, but
I mean,
there's financiers. There's
yeah.
actually financiers that will hire a group of guys, hire 100 guys, buy 20 boats, and say, okay, you work for me, this is how much you get paid, go out there and take over any boats. And initially it was fishing vessels, and then it became more profitable to go after, you know, private vessels, oil tankers, anything they could go after for ransom. So those guys are getting the bulk of the money. You know, when a $10 million ransom's paid on an oil tanker, the guy that financed that operation and financed those pirates is going to get the bulk of it.
Now let me ask you, when you watch media coverage of, say, a hostage situation by Somali pirates, are they even close to describing what actually is going on? Does the media have any kind of understanding of this particular issue? Because it did become kind of a sexy media thing where we had a big vessel like being held hostage, and then bringing in SEALs to rescue the captain of that vessel. And I'm going back a few years, but I was just curious.
There's a movie being done right now that'll be released in 2013 called Captain Phillips, about
Right.
that episode, the captain that was...
Yeah. So let me ask you, how close, because what are my audience, I mean, and part of our show is to try to ask somebody who actually knows what's going on, how close is the media coverage, or was the media coverage, to actually explaining what happened in that incident?
Well, I think in that instance they were very accurate, because that was publicized by the Navy. Obviously, it was something they could brag about. You know, the snipers took that shot at 167 yards at the guys in a bobbing little raft. And
I guess my question isn't clear, but what I'm asking you is the circumstances surrounding the taking
Piracy?
of that ship, the piracy. How close were they to explaining that?
I don't think they understand the bulk of it. I mean, my information and my intelligence on that comes directly from Somalis. You know, I know guys that are in the Somali government. I'm very good friends with several warlords in Somalia, especially in the north, which is, it's called the Puntland region, which is the whole Horn of Africa is called Puntland. And those people there, they explain to me, you know, politically and economically why this problem exists. And it makes complete sense when you look at it. When you're a guy, you know, that doesn't have a job, you can't walk down the street and apply at an auto dealership, a canning factory, because they're not there. There's nothing to do. And a man comes into your village and says, I need 100 guys, I'll pay you $100 a month. All you got to do is go out and do this thing on boats. You know,
so the new government, their purpose, and when you're advising, is to give them some sort of alternative to going and doing that kind of a job.
Economic development is the most important thing. It's the only thing that's going to save Somalia. And they have the opportunity of vast natural resources. In addition to the fishing, they have oil reserves, they have uranium, natural gas, they have lime that's used for cement production. They're close to the greatest emerging markets on the planet, you know, India and China. So they have great opportunity. They're a blank slate, though, and they have to try and figure out how do we establish, you know, an economy. And they've created a new constitution in August that was voted on. They had
what
parliamentary
capacity
elections.
were you in Somalia?
Well, I worked at terrorism matters, and after 9/11,
FBI?
yeah, as an FBI agent,
Right.
and then I developed a lot of relationships that continued post FBI. So I got to know a lot of these guys that were involved in the government. I'm very good friends with the former prime minister who ran for president this past September or August, and the former president I knew very well. So there were individuals that I had been dealing with that I can't go into details about what they did, but were very helpful. Yes, and your audience, unfortunately, and that would get ugly.
Okay. My next question that I was curious about is when I was looking at some of the interviews that you've done, you were working with people in Iraq, and specifically with this one gentleman, to hunt terrorists and using Iraqis to assist you in that task. And then actually you brought him here to this country on a vacation with your family. I mean, this is the story. Was it an Esquire, I think it was,
yes.
that you were river rafting? And I was just curious, what was your position on how Americans treated Iraqis that helped us during the war, after the war? I mean, depending on who you are, if you think it's over. But, you know, what is your position on immigration for those Iraqis? Because I know even with journalists that a lot of Iraqis went out of their way to help us, and staying in that country was tantamount to a death sentence.
Yes.
So how do you think Americans did I know that we took our troops out, but how do you think they treated those Iraqis who had assisted us in our mission?
Well, first to answer the question about the war, the war is not over. We're just not part of it anymore. It's still going on. Al-Qaeda is devastating Iraq. And I talked to that gentleman you referred to in that article. I talked to him yesterday on the phone. I talk to him every few days.
So they are in a constant battle to try to keep Al-Qaeda,
yeah.
to get them out of their country.
Yeah, because Al-Qaeda needs to destabilize Iraq. They cannot have a stable democracy in the Middle East, and that's what they're fighting against. But as far as how we treat those people, I mean, there's a lot of people that unfortunately will not only fall through the cracks, but will be decimated by participating and helping us. And you know, unfortunately, we can't bring them all here. There's special visa programs for people that act as translators and other people that work with the American government. And so a lot of people have come here. I think something like a number of approximately 10,000 a year have come here. But many hundreds of thousands have helped us. And you see the situation in Pakistan with the doctor that helped the agency. Unfortunately, the agency is very much big picture, and they can't look at the minutia. They don't look down at the individual level to see, how can I help this person that helped us? They're looking at the big picture. How do we win this war? How do we, you know, stop Al-Qaeda around the globe? But when you're an operator on the ground and you get to know these people, it's hard not to think of them individually, and I always have tried to consider them, and a lot of people in the American government do, but it takes time to get visas, to get other things, to get them out of Iraq. It's a lengthy process, and that article you read, I finally did get visas for that guy and his family, and his wife and kids now live in the United States. He's still over there fighting.
It's really interesting because, I mean, we got reports, I mean, through the media, that the Iraqis had been rather successful in pushing back Al-Qaeda, and I'm just curious, do you think that, I mean, are they as strong as they were? Did we make any progress? Was it, or was the progress overstated?
No, we made tremendous progress, but it's not a zero-sum game. It doesn't, you make progress and we're beating down an enemy, you walk away from that enemy, they're naturally going to grow stronger. And Iraq has done very well, and they've increased their capabilities tremendously, but they're not ever going to equal the capabilities of the United States military. It's not possible. No first world nation can equal the United States militarily, so we can't expect the Iraqi, a fledgling new country, trying to overcome years of tyranny and decades of war, to be able to take over immediately. So they can't fill the void that we created by leaving, and that's just, it's the nature of the beast. They're trying and they're doing the best they can. They don't have the resources. They don't have hundreds of satellites in the air. So if you could understand modern war fighting, you'd see how we had capabilities that we brought to bear for them that are no longer there right now.
So did you think that the pullout was premature?
Yeah, I don't think you pull out on a date. You pull out when you've accomplished what you're trying to accomplish. And I think we left early for political reasons, when if we had stayed longer or left, had some forces remain. We didn't need to keep 130,000 troops there, but I think we needed to keep a stabilization force there to assist the Iraqi government. And I think that would have been beneficial, and I think most of the Iraqi people agree. I'm not sure that Maliki and everybody at the top of the Iraqi government agreed.
Well, there was political pressure for them, for us to leave as well, because, I mean, we were being viewed as an occupying force. So, I mean, I understand that. I just was curious what actually felt like on the ground for the people that are left behind. And I mean, I understand, and I was in favor of leaving because I don't think we could afford it anymore. I mean, quite frankly.
Yeah, you got to balance that, because when we're going off a fiscal cliff, spending billions of dollars a month there is expensive.
I wanted to ask you and sort of switch gears and talk to you a little bit about a different subject. I was curious, well, I guess it's somewhat related. I'm not sure if I want to go right there, but I sort of lost my thing here. I wanted to talk to you about veterans that are coming back from Iraq and how the government has treated them. From what I've read, a key factor in veterans surviving injuries is that they never would have survived in prior wars, is the medical advancements that we've had in being able to help people with lost limbs and also with head trauma. And I'm curious what you think about how the government has helped veterans who are returning from the war, and I'm sure that many of these people are your friends since you were over there. And if you think, I mean, because one of the things that I was really affected by when I watched President Bush was the terrible shape of some of the Army hospitals. I know my sisters worked in a veterans hospital here at UCLA. Poorly funded, with people who are really ill, and not necessarily just from this war, but from previous wars. And to me, it seems to be a very shameful thing. And I'm just curious if you think there's been any improvement, or is that more spin, political spin, than reality?
No, I think it's very much a reality.
Okay.
And it's a tragedy. These people go over there and risk their lives and give up their limbs and come back here and then are treated by, a bloated bureaucracy that doesn't provide the best resources. I mean, basically they're coming back and they're being treated by the Postal Service. And I think that's a disservice to them. They should have the best medical care, and they should be provided for in every way. And I have several friends. I have a very good friend who's a retired Marine Master Gunnery Sergeant, 24 years of his life in the Marine Corps, wounded many times. I think he got something like 5 Purple Hearts. And he has a heck of a time trying to go through that bureaucracy to get the medical assistance
all kinds of. I mean, I wondered how the veterans were still voting for Bush when all the hospitals were in such disarray, and he seemed to not. I mean, even in terms of his public actions, not make that a priority. Not even have some first lady visiting the hospitals where they were.
Well,
I mean, when
Bush
you saw
himself did visit he visited Walter Reed a lot. He still visits wounded medical facility or wounded warriors in medical facilities constantly. So I don't think it. I agree he didn't give it enough attention, and I don't know politically if he, delegated that to someone else.
I'm just saying what it looked like here at home is that they were, he wasn't going to funerals. We didn't see him very often at hospitals, and that sort of draws attention. And we saw instead reports about the terrible conditions at Walter Reed, at some of the other veterans hospitals. And like I said, I could speak from personal knowledge, underfunded, bad medicine, where the doctors are upset about not having the resources to treat their patients. So I was just curious.
Well, I would say that the problem with that is government is not the solution for something like that. And unfortunately, I think that medical facilities under government care is, as you said, it's ineffective. And because it's a bureaucracy now in Washington, D.C., telling a hospital in San Diego that treats, the Naval Medical Center down there, how to do things instead of the Navy hospital having autonomy or whatever. And I think that's part of the problem. You have a bloated bureaucracy. And unfortunately, I think it's only going to get worse for the rest of us. Because if the federal government takes over all of medicine, you're going to see what you see now in Walter Reed happening in,
as opposed
UCLA
to people
Medical
not having
Center.
any care at all?
No, there's obviously a need for more medical care, no doubt, but I don't think
for working poor people.
Yeah, absolutely, everybody. I mean, and I just don't think the
even though for
federal
those people
bureaucracy,
that think that people are on the dole, I mean, there's so many people that work so hard that have no medical care.
I agree. But what I'm saying is a federal bureaucracy isn't necessarily the right solution. And I don't know, I couldn't give you an answer right now or in a soundbite of how that can be fixed, but I think it's a symptom of a problem that we're going to have whenever we turn to the greater government to try and solve the problem for something that they don't have expertise in. And like you were saying, those doctors that are furious at the hospitals, those doctors should have more of a say what happens in that hospital than somebody sitting behind a desk and.
But the bottom line, even for those hospitals, is that they were underfunded. I mean, people were not paying attention to this huge influx of veterans.
When you're supporting a bloated bureaucracy, it's hard to support the actual end user that needs those funds. And I don't know shorthand what the solution is, but I can tell you I think the problem is that you have people sitting behind desks that are insulated from the real world. If you had a doctor from Bethesda, a doctor from Walter Reed, and a doctor from UCLA, the medical center, going to Washington and sitting before Congress and saying, this is how the resources should be allocated, this is what we need to do for these wounded warriors, I think you'd see a better reaction to that, because right now we have bureaucrats doing it and making those decisions, which I don't think is helpful. And I think it's an absolute travesty. We're in agreement.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you about how well run those hospitals are, because clearly they're not.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're not.
But I also think that putting the First Lady on and her job of trying to help soldiers that are coming home, at least that brought some more public attention, and having the Vice President's wife also, going from city to city and visiting. I do think that there's something to be done by making Americans, because such a small percentage of Americans fought this war. And there are many of us in upper income areas that don't know anybody that fought in the war. And I
literally don't know anybody that didn't.
See, and that disparity means that nobody pays attention to the people that come home because they're not their brothers or their wives or whatever, their fathers or their children. And I think that it's an interesting thing. I don't think that the people fighting the war were aware of how many of us were so distanced from it. And I wonder, where does the blame go for that the war became such a class, such a one-sided type of thing that wasn't paid attention to by the better off classes in the country?
Well, I think it varied geographically. I mean, my home is in Virginia. Virginia is very, very much a military state. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of active duty and retired. Every one of my neighbors is former military. I mean, I literally, when I said I don't know anybody that wasn't affected by the war, I mean that sincerely. I have several, my wife has several female friends whose husbands were killed in combat in Iraq. I have several other friends whose sons were killed in combat. And so it affects that community much more so than it affects people in Southern California. Now, in some parts of California, obviously there are soldiers. Yeah, San Diego's a very big military area. So it would affect them much more.
So you think, because here in Los Angeles, there almost was a disconnect between what was actually happening there, except for to the extent it affected our industry when we declared war and there was the Oscars.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say that that's the truth,
Yeah, it's reality.
Yeah,
But if you're not connected to it in some way, you know, I guess we have to blame the media for not making it more personal. And, you know, back in my town, when there's a funeral for a soldier and it's at our church and we're there anyway and we know the people who died or we know their family, then we're directly connected to it. But if you don't see that on TV, you know, yeah, there were some scenes of caskets coming back and things like that.
But there wasn't supposed to be.
Yeah, there wasn't supposed to be, but there was no coverage. There wasn't a lot of coverage of the families of the victims and who's fighting and the stories about our military. We have the most incredible military in the world. I mean, it was a tremendous opportunity and a blessing for me to have had the opportunity to work with our military overseas. And I was amazed. I mean, my father fought in the Korean War. He was in the Army, he was drafted, and he would have been a professional baseball player if he hadn't been drafted by the Army. So it turned his life in a different direction. But he served and he doesn't talk about it much. He's 83 years old now and he rarely talks about his military experience. But I met guys, you know, 22-year-old captains with master's degrees that could be working for a Fortune 500 company, but instead went to the Marine Corps. And that, I don't think that's very well played in the elite circles in America. It's why John Kerry said, you know, you fail in school, you end up in the military. Well, I know guys that went to Harvard and ended up in the military. I know a DEA agent that died 3 years ago in Afghanistan who went to Harvard Law School and became a Marine.
I know, but I think that that statement
but I'm saying
was
those
poorly
stories
said.
aren't known.
No, but I agree with you, but I think what he was trying to say is that those people that have the education, a lot of the people that had better opportunities didn't have to turn to the military for a job.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not that they had to. There was a guy that was killed in Afghanistan 3 years ago who was a DEA agent when he was killed. But he was a Marine. He was in Harvard Law School when 9/11 happened, and he joined the Marine Corps.
But don't you
with
think
a
that
Harvard
was
law
kind of
degree.
the exception?
No, but I'm saying, even if it is the exception,
Yes.
even if it's 1 in a million, it's not, to say that the norm is people that had no other opportunities is an absolute, it's an abomination. It's not the truth.
It was a stupid comment.
It
but
might have
here's
been true 30 years ago, but it's absolutely not true today. There are guys that have, women and men who have incredible opportunity in life, but choose to serve in the military, and I don't think that's recognized by, you know, by the evening news. I don't think that's ever reflected. Occasionally when somebody dies, they'll tell their individual story, but to tell the whole story of the military, I mean, look at David Petraeus. Look at the guy we have at the top. Look at his education and, you know, intellect. This is not a guy that couldn't be running a Wall Street firm or, you know, the CEO of General Motors. This is a guy that
totally
could be doing
understand
anything.
that, but I think some of that comes from the service in the 60s where people were in college, were being drafted,
Yeah.
and everybody from every walk of life had to serve.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that was his perspective, although it was inarticulate and offensive in some respects.
But I'm not saying that I take offense to it. I'm saying is that I think it reflects a mentality that doesn't realize what the military is today. And I honestly, and I'm not, you know, I didn't vote for John Kerry, and he's not my favorite politician, but I'm not trying to demean him. I'm saying he reflects a greater, you know, it reflects your question. How did we get to that point? And I just think people that are distanced from the military don't realize what the military is today.
Well, let me just ask you one last question.
Okay.
When you were overseas and there were news crews there and there were embedded reporters, what the heck were they doing wrong that they weren't able to transfer to Americans who didn't know somebody in the war? What were they doing wrong in their jobs that helped to create this disconnect?
Well, did you ever see the movie Restrepo? It was a documentary, basically. You know, that actually, you saw who those guys were. That was them. It was real, because, you know, there was a camera with them at all times and recording a lot of what they did. Unfortunately, it's only the sensational things. You know, if it bleeds, it leads. And so that's what, it's not necessarily what the reporters were collecting, but I think that's what got aired here. Because I actually created a book called, you know, about courage I saw in Iraq, and it was combat camera photographers that are out there every day, videographers and still photographers taking images of everything occurring in the battle area.
And what's the name of it? It's called Courage?
Courage, a pictorial essay on life in Iraq. But it was a few years ago, but I saw those images, and I was in briefings every day with General Petraeus and General Odierno, who ran 3rd Corps Command, actually ran the forces on the ground. And they would get these good news of the day briefings every day, where it was hundreds of images that had been collected, and they'd show them to the generals in a classified briefing. And I said, we're not the ones that need to see that. The people in America and around the world need to see all the good things that are going on. And basically, you saw the horrors of war, but you didn't see the 22-year-old soldier from Ohio who's helping an Iraqi lady, set up her vegetable stand because it got bombed the day before, and little gestures that really, not just to win hearts and minds, but it's showing who these soldiers really are. Men, women, airmen, Marines, over there working constantly to help the Iraqi people. And I don't think that message ever got across, because all we saw was Iraqis are dying because of us and our soldiers are dying because we're in a foreign land.
That's right.
There was actually a lot of good going on. Beside the bloodshed, that's all real. That's all should be shown to the American people. But some of the positive things.
Did you think that we should have seen the caskets coming home, that Bush made a wrong call on that?
Well, I think he was trying to protect the families on that. I don't think he was trying to protect the numbers, because the numbers are coming out. Every day there was scrolls on CBS News.
I know, but there's a difference between seeing a casket and seeing a number.
I agree, but what I mean is that's an actual person in that casket, and I think that he was just trying to be respectful of the family members.
Do you really?
I do. I honestly do. I honestly do. And I don't think it was Bush's decision. I think it was military commanders that asked that, because seeing a body bag in Vietnam, if all of a sudden it's your son and you're watching the news and you realize that's your son in that body bag, it feels like a terrible invasion. And I think that's what that was in response to, because there's no way to stop there's 4,000 dead, there's 2,000 dead when those tickers are being counted.
I understand you saying that, but I think there's a huge disconnect between seeing a 4,000 number and seeing a plane full of coffins. And I also think that we saw very little coverage of the funerals. You would see people being notified. And frankly, it sort of gets me back to my other point. A lot of the younger soldiers were coming from impoverished cities where they didn't have that many opportunities. And I think that some of what John Kerry was saying too, again, in an inartful and I think somewhat offensive way, because I do know that there's plenty of people who've been to lots of school who go into the Army. But then again, there are other people that join because they don't have the opportunities that the rest of us get. That they come from places where this would be the only way to get an education. Well, there's certain opportunities.
But the military
in that regard.
Is an opportunity too. It's an opportunity to serve. It's an opportunity to help other people, because we don't just blow things up and kill people. That's the purpose. The military is a tool for doing that. But it's also a tool for spreading democracy. It's a tool for feeding victims of disasters in Haiti. So the military is, its primary purpose: break things that the enemy has and kill the enemy. That's what the military does. But the people in it, as individuals, are able to do a lot more. And when you have a kid that grows up and he's 17, 18 years old, he doesn't have the money to go to college, or he doesn't have the desire to go to college, he doesn't have an industry that he wants to work in yet, he can, become a diesel mechanic working for the military and get out and get a job as a mechanic. So some of them see it as a career path because their fathers and their grandfathers, their uncles and aunts did it.
Well, I understand that. I guess, but the thing that I think about is that for a lot of Americans, they don't even have to, you don't have to worry about your kid being killed in the military. You could send them to a nice, safe college where they can experience, what is probably the greatest gift you could give a kid, 4 years, hopefully just 4, and a great college. But I look at the situation.
But if you don't know people in the military and understand that they look at their military service the same way your kid would have looked at college, because not everybody's the same. And I have a son that is now a rocket scientist, and he really wanted to be in the military, but we said, he decided when he was a freshman in college he was going to leave and do the military, and we said, well, just finish college first and then look at the military. And unfortunately for him, he got an opportunity to be a rocket scientist after college, and he still wants to do the military. And he's talking about maybe in 5 years.
Well, there's a tradition then, and what you're saying in your family.
Yeah, and he really wants to do it. So it's been delayed for him, but now he's got a tremendous opportunity he might not have had if he had gone in the military.
Well, all right. Well, I'm going to stop us and thank you very much for being here. I hardly even got to, but there's so many. I think it's very rare that I get a chance, or even our viewers get a chance to hear from somebody who was actually there to talk about what you're saying, some of the good things that happened there, some of the problems, and actually the truth about what happened there your truth of being there, which is much different than some of the reports that we saw during this war. And my feeling was that I felt that the media failed us, partly because they were embedded. I think that it takes people, first of all, that aren't trained and aren't there to do any kind of a job, and really just sort of plays on their emotions for being with that group of people, and I don't think you could see clearly. I think it's a real disadvantage for anybody as a reporter. I mean, I know that you stay alive, but your
objectivity is definitely put in question when you become friends with the people you're supposedly covering.
That's a problem.
Yeah,
for
it is a problem, but at the same time, I think it gave a lot of the media people that were there the opportunity to learn the military firsthand.
But it still wasn't broadcast.
No, it wasn't. Absolutely, it was not.
So, I mean, I think they need to rethink how that works. If you really want people to see the things that you're talking about. I think Martha Raddatz was on our show, and she talked about it, and I think she spent a lot of time looking at people coming home from service and did reports, and I think was of the stature in her organization to be able to do that kind of a story, but it's pretty far and few between.
Yeah.
And she, you know, and I think still, her objectivity was kind of sacrificed and by being embedded and being with the soldiers all the time. But on the other hand, she still did some great work. But I think it's rare that anybody could do the kinds of stories you're talking about, which is a real problem. Mm-hmm. And my feeling is at this point, if somebody really wants to know what happened overseas, they got to read it, it seems to me. They have to be in the books of the people that were there who actually wrote something, because they can't seem to translate it into any kind of news media kind of thing.
I agree.
But anyway, thanks for being here, and we're going to hopefully have you back so that we can talk about more of your background. We didn't even get to your show busy part of your, just a quick question.
A little bit.
But I think that it was really informative, and I appreciate it.
Thanks
so much, and we will see you on the next episode.